Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today, we're talking about the psychology of uniforms. Yeah, military uniforms, police uniforms, doctors' coats, judges' robes, clergy clothing, sports uniforms, school uniforms, and workplace uniforms all do more than just identify a job or a group.
But it is true that the simplest function of a uniform is identification. On a battlefield, a soldier needs to know who's on his side. In a hospital, a patient wants to know who's part of the medical staff. In a courtroom, people need to know who the judge is. At a sporting event, players and spectators need to know which team is which.
Yeah, the brain likes shortcuts. We do not stop and analyze every person from scratch. We use signs. Clothing is one of the strongest signs.
A uniform says this person has a role. That role may be Boy Scout, officer, soldier, doctor, nurse, priest, rabbi, judge, referee, pilot, chef, security guard, or athlete.
And once the role is visible, people respond to it. They may become more respectful, more cooperative, more nervous, or more defensive, too. The same uniform can produce different reactions depending on the viewer's experience.
It certainly can, Dr. Weaver. A police uniform, for example, may make one person feel safe and another person very anxious. A doctor's lab coat may reassure one patient and make another patient tense. A judge's robe may signal fairness to one person, intimidation to another.
Yeah, that is important. Uniforms do not have one universal effect. Their meaning depends on culture, history, personal experience, and whether the institution has earned trust in their eyes.
Quite so. Dr. Weaver, let's talk about the person wearing the uniform. How does official clothing like that affect behavior from the inside?
Well, that's a really good point. One useful concept is called enclothed cognition. Psychologists Hajo Adam and Adam Galinsky used that term in a 2012 study. Their basic point was that clothing can influence thinking when two things come together: the clothing's symbolic meaning and the physical experience of wearing it.
So the clothing has to mean something to the person wearing it.
Yeah, right. A white coat associated with doctors or scientists may prompt someone to think more carefully because it symbolizes attention, precision, and expertise. But if the same coat is described as a painter's coat, the meaning and the effect changes.
That's a useful distinction. We need to be clear the fabric itself is not magic. The effect comes from the meaning.
Right. A uniform can become a mental switch. A person puts it on and begins to behave more as the role requires. A soldier may become more disciplined. A doctor may become more careful. A judge may become more formal. An athlete may become more team focused.
And in everyday life, people know this already. Many people say they feel different when they dress for work compared to when they dress for being at home.
Yep, that's a simple example. Clothing can help separate private identity from public role. The problem is that the role can sometimes become too strong. A uniform can support responsibility, but it can also let people hide behind the role.
One of the clearest studies on uniforms was Leonard Bickman's 1974 field study. That's often called the social power of a uniform.
Yes, that study is useful because it did not ask people what they thought about uniforms. It looked at what people actually did.
In the study, a person approached strangers on the street while dressed in different ways as a civilian, as a milkman, or as a guard. The person gave small instructions, such as asking someone to pick up a bag, give a dime to another person, or move away from a bus stop.
And people were more likely to obey when the person was dressed as a guard.
That tells us something important. The uniform created a sense of authority, even when the request itself was very minor.
Yeah, people were not obeying because the guard had not explained the law or proved expertise. They were responding to the signal. The clothing made the request seem more legitimate.
I think that helps explain why uniforms are powerful in public spaces. A person in a security uniform, a police uniform, or any kind of official looking jacket can influence behavior very quickly.
And that can be helpful. In emergencies, people need to respond quickly to firefighters, police officers, medical staff, and other trained personnel.
But it also creates risk. If a uniform produces obedience too easily, people may comply against their judgment before they think.
Yeah, that is why uniforms require accountability. The more authority a uniform carries, the more carefully the institution must train and supervise the people wearing it.
Dr. Weaver, military uniforms are one of the oldest examples. They identify the wearer's nation, military branch, rank, unit, and sometimes specialty. They also create unity.
The psychological effect is direct. A military uniform reduces individuality and strengthens group identity. The person is not just acting as a private citizen, he or she is part of a unit and a chain of command.
That's necessary for military function. Armies depend on coordination, on discipline, and quick recognition of rank and obedience to orders.
The uniform can increase commitment and courage because it reminds the wearer of duty training and group loyalty. It also reminds others that the person represents the military, not just themselves.
But those same features, I think, they can become dangerous if they weaken personal judgment.
Yeah, you're right, Dr. Dineen. A uniform can encourage duty, but it can also encourage obedience without reflection. That is why military ethics matter. Soldiers need the discipline, absolutely, but they also need rules of engagement, laws of war, and moral limits.
That connects to obedience research more broadly. Stanley Milgram's famous 1963 obedience study did not focus on uniforms in the same way Bickman's did, but it showed how strongly people can respond to perceived authority.
Milgram's study is highly controversial and ethically troubling, but it remains important because it forced people to ask how ordinary individuals respond when an authority figure tells them to do something harmful.
So the lesson is not that people are helpless. The lesson is that authority symbols, roles, and settings can place strong pressure on individual judgment.
And uniforms are one of those authority symbols.
Police uniforms are different from military uniforms because they operate inside civilian life. They are visible in traffic stops, neighborhoods, schools, public events, and emergencies.
Yeah, police uniform communicates legal authority. It says this person may question, direct, protect, detain, or arrest.
And that authority creates order. A visible police presence may calm a crowd, direct traffic, stop a riot, or help people to know where to go during a crisis.
But it can also create fear. The response depends on experience. Some people associate police uniforms with safeties. Others associate them with suspicion, unequal treatment, or force.
So you're saying, Dr. Weaver, the uniform carries the reputation of the institution?
That's a good way to put it. The clothing itself cannot create trust if behavior destroys it. A police uniform is powerful because it asks the public to accept authority. That means fairness, restraint, and accountability are not optional. They are central to the legitimacy of the uniform.
The officer, his or herself, is also affected. Wearing the uniform can increase confidence and role clarity, but it may also create distance between the officer and the public.
Yeah, and that is one of the major tensions in policing. The uniform must show authority, but the officer still has to remain approachable and accountable. This is one of the problems I associate with ICE, which I think is deliberate on the government's part.
Indeed. Medical uniforms usually communicate expertise and care rather than force. The white lab coat is the classic example.
Yeah, the white coat tells patients that the person is connected to medicine, science, diagnosis, and treatment. It can reassure people because it makes the role visible.
But it can also make some patients anxious. I remember as a child in my cerebral palsy school, they would tell physical therapists do not wear white lab coats. The young children associated that with painful injections. So they encouraged them to wear very brightly colored scrubs. And my good friend, Dr. Andrew Kramer, who we did a podcast on, always got a kick out of that.
Yeah, you're right. Some people experience something that we call white coat hypertension, where blood pressure rises in medical settings. The coat, the exam room, and the medical situation can all increase stress.
So the same coat can mean safety to one person and perhaps danger to another.
Yeah, that's why communication matters. A doctor's coat may open the door to trust, but it cannot replace learning, explaining, and treating patients with respect.
Scrubs are another medical uniform. They're practical, easy to clean, and strongly associated with clinical work.
They can also make medicine look more team based. Doctors, nurses, technicians, and students may all wear similar clothing. That can reduce hierarchy in appearance, but it can also confuse patients who are trying to understand who is responsible for what.
So uniforms organize the medical world, but patients also need clear instructions and communication who is doing what.
Exactly. Patients should not have to guess who is treating them and who is responsible in making the decisions.
Absolutely not. Now, judges' robes are a different kind of uniform. They're not practical clothing in the ordinary sense, they're symbolic.
The robe says the judge represents the law, not personal fashion, wealth, or ordinary social identity.
It also creates distance. The courtroom is not supposed to feel like an ordinary conversation. It's a legal, formal space with strict rules.
That formality can be useful. It reminds everyone that decisions made there are serious. It can also intimidate people, especially those that are unfamiliar with the legal system.
You know, Dr. Weaver, courtrooms use many symbols: the robe, the raised judge's bench, very formal language, the nation's flag, the seal, the command to stand.
Yeah, those symbols can support respect for the law, but respect should not depend only on ceremony. A robe does not make a judge fair, it only marks the responsibility to be fair.
That's a very good distinction, Dr. Weaver. The uniform points to the standard, but it does not prove the standard is being met. Spiritual clothing, the clothing worn by clergy, also marks a role beyond the individual. Depending on the religious tradition, it may show spiritual office, humility, discipline, ritual authority, or continuity with the past.
A collar, robe, habit, vestment, or other religious garment tells people that the wearer is acting in a religious role.
That can make people more willing to approach the person with their guilt, their grief, moral questions, spiritual concerns, or other family problems.
It can also create automatic trust. That trust can be beneficial when the clergy member is ethical and compassionate, but it can be dangerous if people assume the clothing guarantees character.
I'm sorry to say history has given examples of both. Religious clothing has comforted people, preserved community identity, and marked service, but it has also sometimes shielded abuse of authority.
That is why the psychology of uniforms should never be separated from accountability. The more trust the clothing creates, the more responsibility the wearer has.
Now let's look at something a little lighter. Sports uniforms are less about formal authority and more about identity.
Yeah, a jersey tells players and spectators who belongs to which side. It also reminds athletes that they are part of a team.
The uniform connects the individual to the school, city, nation, or organization. It may also connect current players to past teams and traditions.
Yeah, that can increase cooperation. A player wearing the team uniform may feel more responsibility to teammates. The uniform makes the group visible.
I've always been pleasantly amused that fans also wear jerseys even though they're not playing.
Yeah, that is social identity. The fan is saying, I belong with this group. Sports make that psychology easy to see because the colors, logos, and rituals are so highly visible.
But team identity can also sharpen rivalries.
Yes, you're right. Healthy team identity encourages effort, loyalty, and cooperation. Unhealthy team identity encourages hostility, excuses bad behavior, or treats the opponent as less human.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, Dr. Weaver, even in sports, uniforms can bring out both connection and division?
Absolutely.
Some schools, private schools mainly, require school uniforms, and they're often defended as a way to reduce distraction, limit clothing competition, and create a shared school identity.
Yeah, that may help in some settings, but they do not erase social differences. Students still notice shoes, phones, hair accessories, and status signals.
Still, uniforms can tell students you're in a learning environment now.
Yeah, that can help students focus. Others may experience it as control. The effect depends on how the rule is explained and whether students feel respected.
I've noticed work uniforms have a similar function. A mechanic, a pilot, a server, a chef, a delivery worker, a flight attendant, or a security guard, they all wear clothing that identifies the job.
Yeah, work uniforms help customers know whom to approach. They also help workers shift into their role. Putting on the uniform can mean I am on duty now.
But it's important to remember uniforms can also mark hierarchy.
Yeah, they really can. A manager, pilot, chef, or officer may dress differently from others in the same organization. Those differences communicate status and authority.
We should mention the Stanford Prison Experiment because it's often brought up in discussions of uniforms and roles.
Yes, but carefully. The popular version says that college students randomly assigned to be guards or prisoners quickly absorbed the roles, and the guards became abusive.
But later scholars have strongly criticized the study, as I understand.
Yeah, that is correct. Critics argue that the study had serious problems, including researcher influence, demand characteristics, and weak scientific controls. In plain language, participants may have acted in ways they thought the researchers wanted.
So that study should not be used as simple proof that uniforms automatically turn people cruel.
Yeah, you're right. The better lesson is more limited but still important. Roles, settings, authority, and group expectations can shape behavior, but people are not robots. Leadership, rules, supervision, and personal responsibility also matter greatly.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That keeps the discussion balanced.
Yeah, and it prevents us from making the uniform into the whole explanation. Clothing matters, but it works together with culture, authority, reward, punishment, and individual choices.
I think, Dr. Weaver, uniforms work best when the symbol matches the behavior.
I would agree with you on that. A military uniform works well when it represents discipline and lawful service. A police uniform works well when it represents public safety and fairness. A doctor's coat works well when it represents competence and caring. A judge's robe works well when it represents impartial judges. Clergy clothing works well when it represents service and moral responsibility. A sports uniform works well when it represents teamwork and fair competition.
In those cases, the uniform supports the role.
Right. It reminds the wearer what is expected and helps the public understand the role quickly.
But uniforms fail when the behavior contradicts the symbol.
Yeah, a careless doctor, for example, weakens trust in the white coat. An abusive officer weakens trust in the badge. A biased judge weakens trust in the robe. A dishonest clergy member weakens trust in religious office. A player who cheats weakens the meaning of the team uniform.
The betrayal can feel larger because the uniform, at its best, promised something higher.
Yep, that is right. Uniforms raise expectations. When the wearer violates those expectations, the damage spreads beyond one person.
The psychology of uniforms is really about the psychology of visible roles. Uniforms tell people who belongs, who leads, who serves, who protects, who judges, and who plays for which side.
They also affect the wearer. Clothing can increase in attention, confidence, discipline, team identity, and role commitment. Studies such as Adam and Galinsky's work on Enclothed Cognition and Bickman's field study on uniformed authority help explain why.
But uniforms also carry risk. They can create a climate of automatic obedience, social distance, intimidation, and reduced individuality.
That is why a uniform should never be treated as proof of character. It is a symbol of responsibility. The person wearing it still has to earn the trust that the uniform asks others to give.
And the public should respect legitimate roles without surrendering their judgment.
Well said. Uniforms help society function, but they do not replace ethics, accountability, or common sense.
We could go on, but I think we've covered the main points here. Please leave a like, a comment, and a subscription. An awful lot of wonderful things coming up here, folks.
All right. Thank you for listening. We'll see you real soon, hopefully. Bye for now.